A very powerful, useful, and widely used feature of JavaScript is promise. Promise is a built-in object in JavaScript. So let's take a look at its definition. Over here it says that the promise object represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation and its resulting value. Now this definition is a little bit vague, so I have a better definition for you. So let's take a look. So over here, I have written, what is a promise? Promise is an object that provides a useful construct when dealing with asynchronous task. So let's just stop here and understand the first part of the definition. So promise is an object, we understand that, so far so good, that provides a useful construct. So just the way function is a construct, variables is a construct, arrays are constructs, there are different features, operators are constructs, there are different features with distinct capability of JavaScript. Promise is also one of the constructs. But when do we use this construct? We use it when dealing with asynchronous tasks. Okay? So now you may be wondering, what is an asynchronous task? We've already looked at such examples when we were discussing about the event loop. So if we are going to our cheat sheet, and if you scroll down, let's say to the event loop example, you saw that asynchronous tasks are when certain operations are delegated to the third-party process and the JavaScript engine just continues working. So let's say you're using the timer process or the HTTP process, you make an API call to the web. So until that API call resolves, this task is delegated away from the JavaScript engine. So those kind of tasks are asynchronous tasks. Going back to our definition over here, I have what is an async or asynchronous task. An async task is one in which a third-party process is doing a task. So an example would be getting data from a database, getting data from HTTP or from an API. Okay, so let's take a look on how to use a promise. So I have my app.js created over here, and a promise has two parts when you actually use it, just like a function actually. So when you go back to our definition of our functions, scroll up. A function is first of all created or declared, and second, it's actually used or consumed. Similarly, promise is first of all created, you create a promise, and then you use a promise. Okay, so I have those definitions, and now we're going to do the first part. 90% of the time when you're working with your applications, the promise creation process is already done for you. So maybe you're using different features of JavaScript or different libraries that does the creation process, but you actually use the promise that are already created. But in this example, we're going to take a look at both. So step one is to create a promise. Here's how you create one. You simply say const, let's say p, you can call it anything, I'll just call it p, is equal to new promise, like such, and you have successfully created a promise. But not so fast, okay? This promise, when you create one, it takes a callback function. And you know, any function which is taken as a parameter to another function, which is later run by that particular function, is a callback function. So this is a callback function, which it takes. This callback function is commonly known as the executor. But who cares what it's called? Let's just call it a callback function because it truly is a callback function. Now this callback function receives two parameters. These parameters are also names of callback functions, but just stay with me over here. The two parameters are resolve and reject. Now you can call it anything. As you know, when you're creating parameter names, you can call it anything, but resolve and rejects are good names. All right. So let's say for a very basic example, this particular promise will do some kind of async activity. So it has to do something asynchronous. All right. So just to make it very simple, I'm going to use the set timeout process. All right. Which is going to delegate the task away to the timer process. We know that. We've learned that before in our course. So I'm going to come over here and say set timeout and run this function to whatever task, let's say, right? Let's just imagine I'm making a call to the database to check the username and password information of a user. Let's just imagine that, because we have not learned those parts and that's going to complicate our example. We want to make sure we understand the construct first before introducing new concepts. So that's why I'm using the set timeout over here. So just imagine it's going away to check the database records if the username and passwords are correct. Let's just call it, right? And let's say it takes 200 milliseconds, 2000 milliseconds to resolve. Once this activity happens, once the information comes back, either the username information is correct or it's incorrect, right? So let's say if it's correct, you're gonna run the resolve function, right? The parameter is received, and you just run the resolve function, and you're gonna pass in whatever data that you want to provide. So let's say we can simply pass in a success message. We're gonna say successful login. And let's say if it was not successful, you would say, login failed. All right. Now stay with me in this example. Promise is an abstract construct. So that's why I have to give you some examples so it's much more easier for you to grasp. And then you can use it in many different scenarios, all right, in asynchronous activities.